Welcome, and thank you for tuning into our story, titled His Father Died Young and His Mother Raised Him Alone. 2 years into our marriage, we excitedly asked her to move in with us, to repay her love. We never imagined it would be the start of our family's tragedy. The first 2 years of my married life were a period of peace, like a river flowing quietly through the heart of this bustling city. Every morning I'd wake up feeling blessed, wrapped in the warm arms of Liam, a gentle man who always treated me like the most precious thing in his life. Our small condo on the 12th floor wasn't huge, but it was always filled with sunlight and the soothing scent of a lavender and eucalyptus diffuser. It was our sanctuary, a place where we nurtured our simple dreams. From the cream-colored curtains I chose myself to the solid oak dining set that Liam meticulously polished every weekend, every corner held a piece of us. Life for a young couple in a city like Chicago was full of pressure, but thanks to our understanding and willingness to compromise, we never let an argument last past bedtime. Liam was a civil engineer. His job was demanding, and he was often on site at various infrastructure projects. Yet, he never forgot to bring me a small bouquet of freesias or a pastry from a little bakery he liked on his way home. He often said that he owed his mother a lifetime for her sacrifices and owed me a promise of peace. Because of that, I always tried to make our little nest a warm and loving place, so whenever he returned after a long, exhausting day, he would feel nothing but comfort and boundless affection. We had navigated the early, difficult days together, from living in a cramped studio apartment to finally saving enough for a down payment on this condo. Every square foot of this place was marked with our footprints and our sweat, creating a bond so strong I believed nothing could ever break it. Our dinners were often simple, a roasted chicken with a side of steamed broccoli, but they were incredibly sweet. We'd eat and chat about the trivial happenings at our jobs, about our dreams of one day having bright, beautiful children and growing old together on a porch somewhere far from the city noise. Liam was a devoted son. I knew that from the day we started dating. On every holiday, or simply when he got his paycheck, he would wire a portion of it back home to his mom. My mother-in-law, Helen, was a widow. A single mother who had worked her fingers to the bone, through countless harsh Iowa winters and sweltering summers, to raise Liam and send him to college. I had always admired her immense sacrifice and promised myself that I would take care of her, just as Liam would, if I ever had the chance. In my mind, love was something that could bridge any gap, and with a sincere heart, all differences could be harmonized. Those 2 peaceful years of marriage were the solid foundation that made me believe in a bright future, a future where our family would be more complete with Helen in it. One weekend evening, as a summer thunderstorm rattled against the window panes, Liam sat quietly on the balcony, a half-smoked cigarette in his hand. His eyes were fixed on the blurry city lights below, a pensive look on his face that was unusual for him. I walked over, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. "What's on your mind?" I asked softly. Liam let out a long sigh, the smoke mingling with the damp, earthy smell of the rain, creating a strangely melancholic atmosphere. He turned, took my hands in his, and said hesitantly, "Mom's health isn't so good these days. The arthritis in her joints was flaring up, tormenting her whenever the weather changed, and it made it impossible for him to focus on his work. Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "she sacrificed everything for me. Now that she's getting older, the thought of her rattling around all alone in that big, empty farmhouse, it's too much. I want to bring her here to live with us. We can make sure she gets proper care, see the right doctors." Hearing him say that, my heart ached with sympathy. I have parents of my own. I understood the deep-seated anxiety of a child seeing their parent face old age alone. Without a second of hesitation, I nodded in agreement. I believed that honoring our parents was the most sacred duty we had. Liam's eyes lit up. He pulled me into a tight hug, thanking me over and over, telling me how lucky he was to have such an understanding wife. But deep down, a vague worry began to sprout. A worry about the lifestyle clash between 2 generations. Helen had spent her entire life tethered to the land, to the sun and wind of a small farming community. I, on the other hand, was a city girl, accustomed to a fast-paced life and a high value on personal space. Could we, living under one roof, prevent our different daily habits from creating fractures in our home? I reassured myself with the thought that if I was sincere, if I respected her as I would my own mother, she would surely feel my goodwill. We started planning immediately, converting our small home office into a cozy bedroom for her, buying a new plush mattress, and soft linens to ensure she'd sleep well. For the next week, Liam was a whirlwind of activity, from installing grab bars in the bathroom to researching what her favorite comfort foods were so I could prepare them. The atmosphere in our home was buzzing with anticipation, but underneath it, I could feel a subtle, unspoken tension. I started reading articles on how to live harmoniously with in-laws, and I even learned a few classic Midwestern recipes so she wouldn't feel out of place. Seeing Liam so happy, so full of purpose, reaffirmed that I had made the right decision. The night before Liam left to drive to Iowa and bring her back, we lay in bed, painting a picture of our new life as a warm, three-person family. I dreamed of dinners with her at the table, of her telling stories from the old days, and of the bond between Liam and me growing even stronger as we cared for his mother together. The car pulled up to the front of our high-rise on a pale, sun-drenched afternoon. From the lobby window, I could see Helen's small, slightly stooped figure getting out of the car with Liam. She was wearing a simple floral print blouse and practical walking shoes, her hands full, carrying everything from a bag of potatoes from her garden to a freshly baked apple pie and a carton of eggs still dotted with bits of straw. Seeing her looking so weathered and hardworking, my heart swelled. I rushed out to help her with the heavy bags. Helen looked at me, a kind, gentle smile appearing on her deeply wrinkled face. "Oh, you two shouldn't have come down in this heat," she said, her voice carrying the warm, flat vowels of the Midwest. "I'm still strong. You know?" Her voice, as earthy and genuine as the soil she came from, put some of my anxieties at ease. Stepping into our modern condo, Helen seemed timid and overwhelmed. She stared at the polished hardwood floors, hesitating to step inside for fear of dirtying them. I had to take her by the hand, assuring her to make herself at home, before showing her how to use the appliances in the bathroom and kitchen. She looked at the induction stovetop and the microwave with a bewildered expression, occasionally clicking her tongue. "You city folk live so complicated," she remarked. "All these gadgets and gizmos just to cook a meal." The first few days passed with a concerted effort from both sides to adapt, but I soon began to notice the small, creeping differences in our lifestyles, quietly seeping into the cracks of our family life. Helen was an early riser, up by 4 a.m., tidying up and putting on a pot of coffee. The clatter from the kitchen often woke us up. She also distrusted the washing machine, claiming it wasted water and electricity and never got clothes as clean as washing by hand. She'd take our clothes and linens into the bathroom and spend the morning hunched over the tub, scrubbing until her back ached. I tried to persuade her to stop, but she'd just smile and say, "I'm used to it, dear. I can't stand sitting still." At dinner, she had a habit of enthusiastically serving us food, but she'd use the same fork she was eating with to put food on our plates. I'm a bit particular about hygiene, so it made me slightly uncomfortable, but not wanting to hurt her feelings, I always accepted the piece of meatloaf or scoop of mashed potatoes with a smile. She also frequently commented on what she considered my extravagant purchases, like fresh flowers or decorative items for the house. "Back home, we never waste money on flowers. You just step outside and pick some from the garden," she'd say. "You should save that money for a rainy day, or for when you have children." Liam, caught in the middle, often used humor to diffuse the tension. "Mom, just let Sarah spoil you a little bit," he'd joke. Seeing Liam so happy to have his mother and wife getting along, I told myself I needed to be more patient, to understand the perspective of an older woman who had left her entire world behind to live in a glass box in the sky. However, I was beginning to realize that the differences weren't just in our habits, but in our entire philosophies of life, shaped by two different eras. And if not handled with care, they would soon become smoldering embers, waiting for the right moment to burst into flame. The oppressive atmosphere began to creep into our once peaceful home, starting with the smallest things. I love beauty, and I enjoy decorating our space with fragrant, fresh flowers. To my mother-in-law, however, it was an unforgivable extravagance. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped by my favorite florist and picked up a stunning bouquet of pink stargazer lilies for $50 to place on our coffee table. As soon as I started arranging them in a vase, Helen stood beside me, nervously fiddling with the hem of her blouse. Her face fell. "Why would you waste money on something that will just wilt and die?" she asked, her tone making me freeze. $50? Back home, that's a whole week's worth of groceries. I tried to smile and explain that flowers brought life into the home and helped lift one's spirits. But she just shook her head and walked into the kitchen, muttering about how young people these days didn't know how to plan for the future, only how to spend money on frivolous things. Household spending quickly became a sensitive topic. Every time I came back from the grocery store, she would inspect each item, check the price on the receipt, and click her tongue at how expensive everything was. She insisted that the meat and produce at big chain supermarkets were neither fresh nor affordable compared to the farmer's market. Once, to please her, I woke up early and went with her to a local market. Watching her haggle over every penny, arguing with a vendor over $1, made my heart feel heavy. The gap in our mindsets was vast. Helen cooked in the old-fashioned way. She preferred using bacon grease or lard, believing it made food taste richer and more flavorful than vegetable oil. My modern kitchen started accumulating a stubborn film of grease, and the heavy smell of her cooking clung to everything, overwhelming the exhaust fan. I started to feel weary, as every meal became a lecture, a reminder of the hard times, of how she had to pinch every penny to raise Liam. I understood and respected her past, but I also wanted her to understand that life was different now. We had the right to enjoy the fruits of our labor after stressful workdays. There were nights I lay beside Liam, wanting to confide in him about these small but accumulating frustrations. But seeing him sleeping soundly after a long day on a construction site, I would fall silent. I told myself I had to try harder, for my love for him and for the peace of our family. The fresh flowers I bought became less frequent, replaced by lifeless silk arrangements to avoid her criticism. It felt as if the house and I were slowly losing our breath, our freedom. The difference in our palates was another major hurdle. I preferred light, healthy meals with lots of vegetables and minimal salt. Helen, on the other hand, cooked everything to be intensely savory, insisting that food had to be salty to be satisfying. Looking at a plate of oversalted pork chops or a bowl of green beans boiled to a mushy gray, I found myself missing the simple, refined meals the two of us used to share. I didn't blame her. These were the habits of a lifetime. But the forced effort of eating every meal began to fill me with a sense of dread whenever I heard the clatter of plates signaling dinner time. In my mother-in-law's worldview, the man was the pillar of the family, the one who went out to conquer the world, and should never have to touch the unseen work of the kitchen. So, whenever she saw Liam helping me chop vegetables or wash the dishes, her expression would darken with disapproval. One time, Liam saw me busy cleaning the living room and decided to wash the few remaining dishes from lunch. Helen, who was sitting on the sofa, shot up, rushed into the kitchen, and snatched the sponge from his hand. "A grown man has no business doing a woman's work," she scolded gently. "You go rest, son. Let me do this." Liam laughed and told her that times had changed, that it was normal for a husband to help his wife. But she was adamant, pushing him out of the kitchen, and then turning to look at me with an accusatory glare, as if I were a lazy wife who was exploiting her precious son. I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling like a criminal in my own home. I had always been so proud that Liam was a thoughtful man who shared household responsibilities. Now, every one of his helpful gestures became a trigger for tension between his mother and me. Helen often reminded me that back in her day, a wife's duty was to tend to her husband's every need. Liam worked hard all day, she'd say, and when he came home, he deserved to put his feet up and be served, not to be bothered with a broom or a dishcloth. Her words were like tiny cuts to my self-esteem. I also worked a full 8-hour day, dealing with sales targets and stressful meetings. Why could she only see her son's exhaustion and completely overlook my efforts? From then on, whenever Liam wanted to help me, he'd have to sneak a look around to see if his mother was watching. This secretiveness felt absurd and heartbreaking, turning our natural partnership into something clandestine. One evening, as I was mopping the floor, Liam took the mop from me to help. Helen walked out, said nothing to him, but let out a long, heavy sigh before turning and closing her bedroom door behind her. The sharp click of the door latch made the entire condo feel like it was encased in ice. Liam looked at me apologetically, putting the mop down and moving to comfort me, but I gently pushed his hand away, feeling suffocated. I began to feel like an unpaid housekeeper in this home, a place where all attention was focused on Liam, and I was just a supporting character whose role was to serve. Helen's excessive coddling of her son had inadvertently created an invisible wedge between Liam and me. I missed the days when we would wash dishes together, laughing and teasing each other, or clean the house and then collapse on the floor in a fit of giggles. All those simple joys were gone, replaced by a tense silence and the constant scrutiny in my mother-in-law's eyes. I started to wonder if filial piety had to come at the cost of partnership and equality in a marriage. And just like that, the first cracks appeared silent, but excruciatingly painful. The tension in our family was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was now etched on our faces, woven into our words, and echoed in the long, unnerving silences. Every time I walked through our front door, I no longer felt the warmth and peace of a sanctuary. Instead, a heavy, suffocating exhaustion settled over me. My mother-in-law had grown quieter. She would often sit alone on the balcony, gazing into the distance, letting out long, weary sighs as if she were bearing a great sorrow. I knew she was unhappy with my way of life, and I couldn't force myself to become the traditional daughter-in-law she envisioned from a bygone era. Liam, caught between the two most important women in his life, seemed to be at his breaking point. Our dinners were now devoid of laughter, filled only with the dry clinking of silverware and the drone of the television, a hollow attempt to fill the void. Sometimes, I would overhear Helen complaining to Liam in her room. "She's a wife, but she doesn't know the first thing about saving money. All she does is dress up and buy useless things. You need to teach her, son. At this rate, how will you ever afford to raise children?" I'd stand outside the door, my heart clenching with hurt. I had never used a single dollar of Liam's salary for my personal hobbies. I wanted to burst in, to explain how hard I worked alongside him to shoulder our family's finances. But I held back, not wanting to put Liam in an even more difficult position. However, Liam's silence in those moments was what wounded me the most. He would just murmur non-committally to appease his mother. But to me, his silence felt like a tacit agreement with her criticisms. The conflict reached its peak when Helen, on her own initiative, threw out my entire collection of fashion magazines and the small, sentimental trinkets I had collected over the years, declaring them dust-collecting clutter. When I came home from work to find my favorite corner of the room bare, I couldn't hold back my tears. Liam rushed to comfort me, saying, "She was just trying to clean up, Sarah. It's not a big deal." His words were like a lit match to the last of my patience. "You don't understand anything," I screamed. "This is my house too, and I have a right to keep my own things." My mother-in-law stood in the doorway, her eyes red and filled with disappointment. "I'm just an old woman trying to help," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm treated like a meddler. Fine. I'll go back to Iowa, out of your sight, so you two can live however you want." Her words sent Liam into a panic. He turned on me, accusing me of being selfish and disrespectful to an elder. That night, for the first time since our wedding day, we had a massive fight. Vicious words, hurled in the heat of anger, left deep, festering wounds. That night, Liam slept on the sofa, leaving me alone in our vast bedroom with my muffled, heartbroken sobs. Helen's presence, meant to be an act of love and duty, had become a cruel test for our marriage. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own home, and the man on the other side of the wall no longer felt like the one who had promised to protect me for the rest of his life. The thick, suffocating atmosphere was a clear sign that a storm was about to break, and I knew I was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no idea how to stop myself from falling. The next morning, the Chicago sky was a sullen, bruised gray, mirroring the gloom in my heart. After a sleepless night following our terrible fight, I woke up with puffy eyes and a head that felt like it was filled with lead. Liam was already up, sitting silently at the dining table, his gaze avoiding mine. From the kitchen, the sizzle of grease and a pungent, heavy smell wafted out, making my stomach churn. My mother-in-law was frying bacon in a pan of lard, She had brought from home a delicacy she claimed was the best on earth because the pork came from a local farm. The smell of bacon mixed with hot lard, which I usually managed to tolerate, felt absolutely repulsive this morning. I walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water, but as I neared the dining table, the overpowering odor hit me full force. My stomach lurched. A wave of nausea surged up my throat. Unable to control it, I clamped my hand over my mouth and ran for the bathroom. The sound of retching echoed in the quiet morning. I heaved until I was empty, my body trembling and weak. I had no idea it was the first sign of a tiny life forming inside me. I simply thought it was the result of stress and exhaustion. When I emerged from the bathroom, pale and drained, I was met by my mother-in-law's sharp, furious glare. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, her eyes filled with contempt. She threw a dish towel onto the table. "You don't have to put on a show for me," she hissed, her voice shaking with indignation. "If you think an old woman's cooking is filthy and backwards, just say it to my face." I stared at her, stunned, and tried to explain. "No, Mom, I really don't feel well. It's not about the food." But she cut me off, waving her hand dismissively. "Ever since I got here, you've never treated me like a mother. You've been trying to find a way to get rid of me, and now you're pretending to be sick when I cook for you. I see it." Liam walked over then. But instead of asking if I was okay, he looked at me with profound disappointment. "Sarah, can you stop being so dramatic?" he said, his voice cold. "Mom worked hard all morning to make us breakfast. How could you treat her like this?" The devastating misunderstanding was like a knife twisting in my already bleeding heart. I looked at them, the two people I had loved and respected, now standing united against me, judging and condemning me without cause. I felt utterly and completely alone in the very home I had poured my soul into building. The lingering smell of bacon made another wave of nausea rise, but this time, the pain in my heart was far worse than any physical discomfort. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, closing the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed, ignoring the hushed, critical whispers that followed me. I didn't know then that this fateful breakfast would be the beginning of a tragedy from which there was no return. The click of my bedroom door shutting seemed to be the final straw for Liam's pent-up anger. He didn't leave me in peace. He threw the door open, his face flushed, and his eyes shot with terrifying red veins. He screamed at me, calling me a disrespectful wife, an ungrateful daughter-in-law with no manners for walking away while his mother was speaking. I shot up from the bed, my own long-suppressed frustrations exploding. "Have you ever tried to see things from my perspective?" I shrieked back. "Do you have any idea how your mother has been treating me?" We stood in the middle of the room, hurling the ugliest, most venomous words we could think of at each other, like poisoned arrows. I accused him of being a weak, spineless man who blindly obeyed his mother without any sense of right or wrong. He, in turn, called me a snobbish city girl who looked down on his humble rural roots. The fight escalated, our shouts echoing through the small condo, loud enough for the neighbors to hear every word. In the living room, my mother-in-law's muffled sobs only added to the chaos. Between sobs, she lamented that she was the cause of our family's ruin, that her useless old self was a burden to her son. Her words were like gasoline on a fire, enraging Liam even more. He turned all his fury on me, blaming me for everything. "If you can't respect my mother, if you can't live with her, then this marriage is meaningless," he yelled. I laughed through my tears. "Fine. Then go live with your precious mother for the rest of your life. I can't take this suffocating atmosphere for one more second." In a final, desperate act of rage, I grabbed the vase of freesias from the dresser and hurled it against the floor. The sound of shattering ceramic mirrored the sound of my heart breaking. Shards flew everywhere, a testament to a fracture that could never be repaired. Liam stared at me with the eyes of a stranger, as if he no longer recognized the woman standing before him. "You're a monster," he whispered, "not the gentle wife I fell in love with." We continued to torture each other with words, inflicting the deepest wounds we could imagine. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The wounded pride of a disrespected woman had completely stripped me of my reason. Amidst our battle, my mother-in-law suddenly went silent. The crying and wailing stopped. She quietly slipped into her room, but we were too consumed by our rage to notice. After screaming until our voices were hoarse, Liam stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. I collapsed onto the floor amidst the broken shards of the vase, burying my face in my hands and sobbing for my cruel fate. I had no idea that in the next room, my mother-in-law was tremblingly packing a few old clothes into a canvas bag. Believing her presence was the source of all our pain, she had decided to leave, to give us back our peace, never knowing the horrific price of that decision. After the terrible fight, a dreadful silence fell over the condo, the kind of quiet that follows a devastating fire, leaving only ashes. Exhausted, I began cleaning up the mess in our bedroom. The sharp ceramic shards cut my hand, drawing blood, but I barely felt it. The pain in my heart was too immense. I eventually drifted off on the living room sofa, completely drained. I woke up when the late afternoon sun slanted through the window. I looked around. Helen was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen was cold, and the door to her room was slightly ajar. I figured she had gone to the nearby park to cool off, as she often did, or perhaps she was in her room, giving me the silent treatment. I didn't bother to call out to her. My pride was still too raw. It wasn't until dusk, when Liam returned, that the stillness of the house began to feel ominous. He glanced at me with cold eyes and walked straight to his mother's room, intending to call her for dinner. A few seconds later, I heard him cry out her name. His voice was filled with a panic I had never heard before. I ran in. The room was empty. Helen's old canvas bag was gone. On the neatly made bed lay only a single, folded piece of paper, torn from a notepad. Her handwriting was shaky and uneven. "I'm going home," it read. "Don't look for me. I'm old and can't help you kids with anything. Only cause you to fight. You'll be happier when I'm gone." Liam held the note, his hands shaking violently. He turned to me, his eyes burning with an incinerating rage. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he snarled. "You've driven my mother out of this house. Are you happy now?" I was stunned. A wave of regret washed over me. I didn't mean to drive her away," I stammered. "I was just angry." But Liam wasn't listening. He grabbed his car keys and bolted out the door. I scrambled after him, my own heart pounding with a terrible anxiety. Helen knew nothing of the city's confusing streets. She didn't have a cell phone, and a cold, drizzling rain had begun to fall. We drove through the surrounding neighborhoods, asking security guards, street vendors, anyone we could find. But no one had seen an elderly woman in a simple blouse carrying a canvas bag. Fear began to consume me. I prayed silently for her safety, cursing myself for being so petty, so hot-headed, for letting things spiral so far out of control. Liam drove, muttering his mother's name under his breath, tears streaming down his face. Sitting beside him, I felt like a condemned criminal awaiting my sentence. The city, with its glittering nightlights, felt vast and cruel, as if it could swallow a lost, elderly woman whole. Every passing minute felt like an eternity, and a dark premonition began to take root in my heart, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Something we couldn't stop. The night rain grew heavier, each cold drop hitting the windshield, like a whip against my guilt-ridden soul. Liam drove frantically through intersections, his eyes wild with worry, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. We checked the bus station, the train station, even the parks where she liked to sit, but her small figure was nowhere to be found. I sat beside him, a lump in my throat, praying that she was just lost. I swore that if she was safe, I would get on my knees and beg for her forgiveness. Suddenly, the phone in Liam's jacket buzzed, shattering the thick silence of fear. He pulled over, his hand trembling as he looked at the unknown number. A voice on the other end, a police officer, asked if he was the next of kin for a woman named Helen Miller. I saw Liam's body go rigid. "What happened to my mother?" he choked out. "Where is she?" When the words hospital and accident came through the speaker, the phone slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the floor. His face was ashen. I shakily picked up the phone, managed to get the address, and urged him to drive. The entire way to the hospital, I didn't dare look at him. I knew that in his mind, I was the cause of this entire tragedy. I could only clutch the seat, tears mixing with the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers, creating a soundtrack of utter despair. The hospital at night reeked of antiseptic and was bathed in the cold, sterile glow of fluorescent lights. We rushed to the emergency room, but what we saw wasn't Helen being treated. It was a gurney in a quiet corner of the hallway, covered with a stark white sheet. Liam walked toward it, his steps heavy, as if his feet were made of lead. With a trembling hand, he lifted the corner of the sheet. I sank to the floor. I saw my mother-in-law's face, her eyes closed forever. A large, gruesome wound on her forehead was matted with blood and the grime of the rainy street. The police told us that, being unfamiliar with the city traffic and in a hurry, she had tried to cross the street against the light and was struck by a truck. In her coat pocket, besides the hastily written note for us, was a small napkin-wrapped bundle. Inside were a few strips of the bacon she had fried that morning. Now burnt and cold, she must have packed them for the journey, not wanting to be a bother to anyone. Liam let out a raw, guttural scream of pain and collapsed over his mother's cold body, his sobs echoing through the quiet hallway. The sound of a grown man who has lost his only anchor in the world was heart-wrenching. I tried to approach, to offer some comfort, but he shoved me away violently. His eyes, when they met mine, held no trace of love, only pure, undiluted hatred. "Are you satisfied now?" he roared in the middle of the hospital corridor. "You killed her. Your selfishness pushed her out onto the street in a storm." His words were 1,000 needles piercing my heart. I could only stand there, mute, drowning in the immeasurable pain of an unforgivable sinner. Helen was gone, and she had taken with her the peace of our family, and the forgiveness I would never have the chance to ask for. The city rain continued to fall, but in my soul, a brutal, endless winter had just begun. After the tear-soaked funeral back in Iowa, we returned to Chicago, to a home shrouded in a suffocating silence. The condo, once filled with laughter, now felt like a tomb. The faint scent of incense from the small memorial we set up for Helen lingered in the air, a constant, heavy weight on my conscience. Liam was no longer the kind, warm man I had known. He became withdrawn and taciturn. Whenever his gaze fell on me, it was either as cold as ice or filled with an unquenchable resentment. He started leaving for work before dawn and coming home late, often drunk, without so much as a glance in my direction. He moved his things out to the living room, sleeping on the sofa, and leaving me to face my extreme loneliness in our shared bedroom, a room that had once been our haven. I tried everything to mend the rift. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house immaculate, and attempted to start conversations. But all I received was a terrifying silence or curt, sarcastic replies. Once, I brought him a bowl of hot soup. He slapped it out of my hand, sending it crashing to the floor. "Stop with the act," he sneered. "Who are you cooking for? My mother is dead. Is this when you finally decide to play the part of a good daughter-in-law?" The shattered ceramic and hot soup, splattered across the floor, were a perfect metaphor for my pride, which he had just stomped on without a second thought. I understood that his grief was immense, but why couldn't he see that I was also in pain, tormented by guilt so severe that I couldn't sleep at night? I felt like a ghost in my own house, where every corner reminded me of Helen's presence and my own culpability. Liam's coldness escalated. He began to openly display his disgust for me in front of friends and colleagues. When anyone asked about his family, he'd give a bitter laugh and say, "My place is just somewhere I sleep now. It's not a home anymore." I noticed him texting and calling someone late into the night. On a few occasions, I saw a strange woman drop him off at the entrance to our building. My heart squeezed tight, but I felt I had lost all right to be jealous or to question him. I was the one who had inflicted this massive wound. Sometimes I wanted to scream that I had loved his mother too, that I never wanted any of this to happen. But then I'd look at the photo of Helen on the memorial shelf, at her kind, forgiving eyes, and the words would die in my throat. Every day was a form of psychological torture. I lost weight rapidly, my face grew gaunt, and my eyes were perpetually ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep. Liam remained unchanged, treating me like a stranger, a piece of furniture. My very existence seemed to be nothing more than a painful reminder of the tragedy. I wondered if the love we had shared for 2 years had ever been real, or if it was just a fragile facade, shattered by the first real storm. His transformation was so swift, so brutal, that I couldn't adapt. All I could do was endure in silence, crying myself to sleep with the faint hope that time would heal all wounds. But I didn't know that the darkest days were still ahead. Amidst those dark and hopeless days, my body began to exhibit strange symptoms, which I initially dismissed as a physical manifestation of my emotional breakdown. I felt dizzy and nauseous every morning, and even the simple, bland meals I forced myself to eat became impossible to swallow. The smell of bacon, which I had once found so repulsive, now made my stomach turn just at the thought of it. I remembered that fateful morning, the vomiting that led to Helen's misunderstanding, and my heart clenched with a new, terrifying suspicion. I secretly bought a pregnancy test. My hands trembled as I held the small plastic stick in the bathroom. When two distinct pink lines appeared, I sank to the floor, a mess of choked sobs and hysterical laughter. I was pregnant. A tiny life, the result of a love that was now in ruins, was growing inside me, while its father viewed its mother as an enemy. The initial joy of becoming a mother was instantly extinguished by the fear of a bleak future. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes held a faint, desperate flicker of hope. I wanted to run out, to throw my arms around Liam, and tell him, "We're going to have a baby. This child is a gift from your mother, a chance for us to heal." But then I heard the sharp click of his door, closing in the living room. He had just come home, reeking of alcohol, a scowl on his face, the words caught in my throat. I was terrified that if I told him now, he would accuse me of using the child as a pawn to trap him, to whitewash my sins. I decided to keep my pregnancy a secret. I didn't dare tell anyone, least of all Liam, because I couldn't bear the thought of my child being met with coldness before it was even born. I started to take better care of myself, forcing down bland porridge so the baby would have nourishment. Lying alone at night, I would place a hand on my belly and whisper apologies to my child for bringing it into such a broken world. I promised it that no matter what happened, even if its father never accepted me, I would protect and love it with every fiber of my being. The pain of losing my mother-in-law and the cold indifference of my husband were still ever present. But the existence of this child gave me a reason to go on. I was no longer living just for myself. I had to live for this tiny seed of life, growing within my withered body. However, hiding a pregnancy while my health was failing was not easy. The morning sickness was relentless, forcing me to run to the bathroom and turn on the faucet to mask the sound of my heaving. Once, Liam saw me lying exhausted on the sofa. He just said coldly, "You're always sick. You're useless. It's pathetic to look at you." His words were like salt in an open wound, but I just bowed my head in silence, my hand instinctively tightening over my abdomen. I felt like a coward for not facing the truth. But the hurt Liam had caused was so immense that I had lost all faith in his capacity for understanding. I lived in silence, clutching my secret like the last precious gem in a pile of rubble, never knowing that this silence would lead to an even more heartbreaking conclusion. The months that followed were a long, arduous journey of endurance and concealment. My growing belly began to show, even under the baggy clothes I wore to deceive Liam's indifferent eyes. I embarked on my journey to motherhood in a solitude so profound it was chilling. Each time I went for a prenatal checkup, I would see other couples together, the husband tenderly holding his wife's purse, the wife smiling, resting her head on his shoulder. My heart would ache as if it were being squeezed in a vice. I would stand in line alone, wait for my turn alone. When I saw the tiny, flickering image of my baby on the ultrasound screen, tears would stream down my face, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming love and pity for this little soul, who had chosen to enter such a broken family. The doctor would look at me with concern, asking why no one was with me, noting that my blood pressure was low and I was showing signs of severe malnutrition. I could only manage a weak smile and lie that my husband was away on a long business trip, then quickly grab my results and leave to escape the curious stares. Coming home to the deafening silence of our condo was always the hardest part. Liam wouldn't be back for hours. The memorial for his mother was a constant, silent accusation of the guilt I carried. I'd force down a bowl of plain white rice, whispering, "Hang in there, little one. Mommy will make it up to you." As long as you are born safe and sound, I can endure anything. Many times, I'd see Liam drinking alone on the balcony, and I would be on the verge of walking over, of taking his hand and placing it on my belly so he could feel the flutter of life inside. But the coldness in his eyes, the way he would flinch away from my touch, always crushed my courage. He saw me as a murderer, a cruel woman who had taken his beloved mother from him. How could he possibly believe I was carrying his child? He would probably think it was another one of my schemes to tie him down. That doubt made me retreat into the last shell of my pride. I accepted going to appointments alone, enduring the backaches and the agonizing leg cramps at night without a single complaint. Some days, it would be pouring rain, and I'd stand under the hospital awning, waiting for a taxi, feeling so small and lost. The feeling of being abandoned by the man I loved while carrying his child was a pain beyond words. I began to question what I was fighting for. A marriage that was already dead? A man who had lost all faith in me? But then, a gentle kick from inside my belly would give me the strength to carry on. I hid the ultrasound photos deep inside a locked drawer, my secret treasure. I lived like a shadow in our shared home, where even my footsteps had to be light for fear of disturbing Liam's resentful tranquility. The living room became his territory, furnished with a folding cot and littered with empty beer bottles and cigarette packs. I was confined to our bedroom, a space once filled with love, now saturated with loneliness and nightly tears. We lived under the same roof, but in different worlds, without a single word, laugh, or even a shared glance. Liam often came home after I had fallen into an exhausted sleep and left before I was awake. The physical distance between our rooms was only a few steps, but the emotional chasm between us was bottomless. I could feel his revulsion in the way he would rewash a dish I had just used, or spray air freshener to erase my scent from a room I had just passed through. Some nights, I'd be wide awake from the pain in my back and hear him sighing and tossing on the cot outside. My heart would break. I wanted to ask him if he was okay, if he needed a massage, but I was terrified that his harsh rejection would be the final blow that shattered me completely. I got used to doing everything myself, from changing a burnt-out light bulb to carrying heavy bags of groceries up from the car. As my belly grew, these tasks became harder, but I never asked for help, knowing his response would be a look of pure contempt. Liam, too, seemed to be in a deep crisis. His complexion grew worse, his skin taking on a grayish pallor, and I often heard him coughing violently in the night. But whenever I asked, he would snap at me to mind my own business. His coldness culminated in one final, symbolic act. He took down our wedding portrait from its place of honor in the living room and replaced it with his mother's memorial photo. It was a silent declaration that in this house, love had no place. Only grief and worship remained. I stood there, staring at our wedding photo, tossed in a dusty corner with old boxes and cobwebs, as tears streamed down my face. That photo represented our vows, our promise to walk through life together. Now, it was treated like trash. I secretly retrieved it, wiped it clean, and hid it under our bed. I still loved him. I still hoped that one day he would understand. But my patience was wearing thin. Every meal, I would intentionally cook enough for two and leave his portion on the table. He never touched it. He'd either buy takeout or go to bed hungry, leaving my efforts to grow cold on the stove. Looking at the untouched plate of food, and then at his back turned towards me in the other room, I would feel a deep, chilling despair. We were torturing each other with silence, with the stubborn pride of two deeply wounded hearts. The baby in my womb seemed to sense my sadness and would kick and squirm, a feeling that was both painful and comforting. At least in this cruel world, I had my child. He was the only one on my side, the only reason I didn't give up completely. The boundaries in our home became stark. I never entered the living room if he was there, and he never set foot in the bedroom. We were like two enemies sharing a shelter, waiting for one final storm to tear us apart for good. A suspicion about Liam's fidelity began to grow. It started when I found a long, auburn hair on his shirt collar not my color. Then there was the scent of a strange, expensive perfume that clung to him when he came home late, overpowering the usual smell of smoke. I tried to convince myself it was just a colleague, but a pregnant woman's intuition is a powerful thing. I started noticing his furtive phone calls on the balcony, The way he would smile and speak softly to someone on the screen, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long, long time. The pain of betrayal, piled on top of the pain of abandonment, was crushing me. One afternoon, walking home from a checkup, I froze. Liam's car was parked near a small cafe. I watched as he walked out with a young, stylish woman. She touched his arm gently, and he smiled as he opened the car door for her. The look in his eyes was one of warmth and trust. My heart felt as if it had been ripped from my chest. I stood motionless on the busy sidewalk, oblivious to the tears streaming down my face, to the concerned glances of strangers at my large, pregnant belly. So, this was it. The reason for his coldness wasn't just his mother's death. It was because he had found a new, more peaceful harbor, someone who didn't carry the weight of his tragic memories. That night, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood at the edge of the living room and asked him who the woman was. He stiffened, a flicker of panic in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual cold, cruel mask. He didn't answer, just snapped at me to stop spying on him, that who he saw and what he did was no longer any of my business. "I am still your wife!" I screamed, my voice breaking. He let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "From the day my mother died, we stopped being anything to each other. Don't use the title of wife to try and control me." I stumbled back into the bedroom and slammed the door, collapsing in a heap of tears. The feeling of being replaced, of being an obstacle to his new happiness, was a mortal wound. I looked down at my swollen belly, my heart aching for my unborn child. "Your father has found someone else, little one. He doesn't need us anymore. What are we going to do?" Negative thoughts swirled around me. I wanted a divorce. I wanted to leave this place and never look back. But the vulnerability of a mother held me captive. I was afraid of my child being born without a father, afraid I wouldn't be strong enough to raise him alone in this big, unforgiving city. So I continued to live in silent suspicion and jealousy, each day a fierce internal battle. I had no idea who that woman really was, or why Liam was being so secretive. The silence in our house had finally reached its absolute limit. Not a peaceful silence, but the dead quiet after a hurricane has laid everything to waste. One weekend evening, as the city lights began to dance outside our window, Liam came home looking strangely calm. It was a calmness that I knew preceded a final, decisive action. He didn't go to his cot in the living room. He sat down at the dining table where I was quietly peeling an apple. He placed a crisp, white paper on the table. At the top, in cold, printed letters, were the words, "Divorce Petition." My heart stopped. Even though I had been preparing for this day, seeing it in black and white was a blow that sent a shockwave of pain through my entire body. Liam looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with the burning rage of the early days, but with a profound, bone-deep weariness. "The longer we stay together, the more we hurt each other," he said, his voice flat. "Every time I look at you, I see my mother's death. I can't forgive myself, and I can't forgive you." He told me he had arranged everything. The condo would be mine. He would leave with nothing, and start over. His words were light, but they landed on my chest with the weight of a mountain, making it impossible to breathe. I looked down at my belly, hidden under my loose sweater, and my heart ached for the child who was about to be born without a father. Should I tell him the truth now? Use it to make him stay? But my pride, and the mountain of hurt he had inflicted, held me back. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking so badly I could barely write my name. I thought of our 2 happy years, of the promises we made, all of it now reduced to this one fateful signature. The tears wouldn't come. They had dried up long ago. I just felt a vast, empty void swallowing me whole. I signed the paper, my shaky signature a final, definitive end to the marriage that had once been my entire world. I pushed the paper back to him, stood up, and walked to the bedroom without another word. Behind me, I heard Liam let out a long, slow sigh. Whether it was a sigh of relief or regret, I no longer had the energy to decipher. That night, I curled up on the large, empty bed, my hand resting on my belly, comforting my blameless child. "It's just us now, little one. Your father has chosen to leave to find his own peace." The house felt cavernous and colder than ever. Every object seemed to mock my failure to keep our family together. I felt like a lone traveler lost in a desert, with no direction and no will to go on. The freedom Liam sought had finally arrived. But for me, it was a life sentence of loneliness and grief. I lay in the dark, listening to the tired beat of my own heart, waiting for a morning I knew would bring no light. After that night, Liam began packing. He quietly sorted his clothes, books, and personal effects into cardboard boxes in the living room. I, too, began packing away memories in my own room, preparing for the single life ahead. But just as our separation was imminent, an unexpected event changed everything. That morning, while trying to reach a box on a high shelf in the closet, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over me. The world spun, and my legs gave out. I collapsed, and the box tumbled down, spilling its contents across the floor, including the ultrasound photos I had kept hidden for so long. Hearing the crash, Liam rushed in. He froze at the sight of me lying on the floor, pale and covered in a cold sweat. In a panic, he scooped me up and carried me to the bed, calling my name with a desperate urgency I hadn't heard in months. As he scrambled to get me some water, his eyes fell on the scattered ultrasound images. He picked one up. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the image of a tiny, developing baby and the text confirming a pregnancy of over 6 months. I came to, groggy and disoriented, to see Liam standing there, frozen, the photo in his hand. His hand was shaking so much, the paper crinkled. He looked at me, his eyes a maelstrom of shock, confusion, and a deep, unspoken pain. "What is this?" he stammered. "Why did you hide this from me?" "This baby, it's ours, isn't it?" I looked at him, and the dam of tears finally broke. "What does it matter now?" I sobbed. "We signed the divorce papers. This child has nothing to do with you anymore." Liam fell to his knees beside the bed. He grabbed my cold hands and pressed them to his face, his body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. "I'm a monster," he choked out. "A terrible father. I abandoned you when you needed me most." He couldn't believe he had been so blind, so cruel, ignoring my sickness and fatigue. He remembered all the times I had been ill, and he had met me with scorn. He hid his own face in disgust at his own stupidity and cruelty. The truth about the baby was like a bucket of ice water, jolting him out of his grief-stricken stupor. He realized he had been on the verge of losing the most precious thing in the world. I lay there, watching the man who had just been ready to walk away, now weeping and begging for my forgiveness. The irony was bitter. The truth was out, but my pain didn't vanish. If anything, it became sharper. I was disgusted by his sudden change of heart. If not for this baby, he would have walked away without a second glance. Was he coming back out of love for me, or out of a sense of duty to the child he had always wanted? Liam clung to me, promising to make everything right, promising he would never let me or the baby suffer again. But in my heart, an invisible wall had been built, brick by painful brick, and I didn't know if love was strong enough to tear it down. From the day he learned about the pregnancy, Liam changed completely. He moved his things back into our bedroom, despite my protests. He began to care for me with an unfamiliar, almost desperate tenderness, cooking nutritious meals, staying up late to massage my cramping legs. He came home early from work every day, the late nights and drinking forgotten. The mysterious woman was never seen again. He meticulously cleaned the house, bought baby supplies, and always looked at me with eyes full of remorse. But for me, his actions felt like medicine applied too late to a wound that had already turned septic. I accepted his care passively, without a smile or a word of thanks. My heart felt frozen. Whenever Liam tried to touch my belly, to feel the baby kick, I would turn away or push his hand aside. The touch of the man who had so coldly rejected me made my skin crawl. "If you're doing this for the baby, fine," I told him once. "But don't expect me to go back to the way things were. The wife you knew died that night with your mother." His face would fall, and he would bow his head in silence, but he never stopped trying. He accepted my coldness as a just punishment. He did everything to make me comfortable, but the awkwardness between us was a thick blanket over the house. Our meals were now healthy, but the atmosphere remained heavy. I ate for the baby, while Liam watched me, his face a mask of sorrow. I began to notice strange things about his health. He was losing weight at an alarming rate. His skin had a sallow, unhealthy tinge, and he was plagued by a persistent, rattling cough. I saw him secretly taking pills in the bathroom. When I asked, he'd force a smile and say it was just vitamins, that he was overworked. I didn't press further. My heart was still too full of resentment. I suspected he was faking it to gain my sympathy, to earn my forgiveness. My distrust had made me so cynical that I saw his every action through a lens of suspicion. Liam quietly prepared for the baby's arrival. He assembled the crib, washed and folded tiny clothes, and set up a substantial savings account in my name. His devotion sometimes swayed me, but then the memory of the divorce papers, of him shoving me away at the hospital, would resurface, and my heart would harden again. I told myself not to be weak, not to be fooled by this temporary kindness. We lived in a false peace, where love had been replaced by duty and guilt. I didn't realize that behind his devotion, Liam was hiding a terrible secret, a secret he was trying to keep until his very last breath. And as my belly grew larger, the silence between us grew more terrifying. I was waiting for our child to be born so I could leave him for good, never imagining that the day of the birth would also be the day fate would cruelly take another loved one from me. Our life drifted on in a heavy, strained silence. Liam was persistent in his care, but his health was in a freefall. I would often find him sitting alone in the dark living room, his hands pressed against his right side, his face contorted in pain. But the moment I appeared, he would force a smile, hiding his agony. I would watch him with a cynical eye, thinking he was putting on a show, using a pity play to win me over. My distrust had made me so cruel that I viewed his genuine suffering as a clumsy performance. Some nights, his coughing from the living room was so violent, it sounded like it was tearing him apart. I'd lie in bed, hearing him gasp for breath, and a flicker of worry would ignite within me. But the embers of my resentment for his mother's death and his perceived betrayal were still glowing too hot. I'd tell myself that he was a strong construction engineer. He couldn't possibly be that sick. And I'd turn my back, trying to ignore the warning bells. Liam grew visibly thinner, his eyes sunken, his once tan skin now a sickly, jaundiced color. He still went to work, but he returned each day looking like a ghost, mustering his last ounces of energy to cook for me. One time, he dropped a pill bottle. I picked one up and asked what it was. He snatched it back, claiming it was just a painkiller for stress headaches. I gave a bitter, mocking laugh. If the pain is that bad, why don't you go find that woman with the auburn hair to take care of you? Don't stand here looking pathetic for my benefit. Liam looked at me with an expression of profound sadness and hopelessness, but he didn't argue. He just quietly picked up the pills and went to the kitchen to make my dinner. Watching his frail, stooped back, a pang of pity shot through me. But the selfishness of a wounded person quickly suppressed it. I continued to live in my bubble of suspicion, ignoring the fact that he was withering away before my eyes. I had no idea that every pill he took was a desperate attempt to prolong his life, just long enough to see his child's face. His pain was a death knell, and I was deaf to it, blinded by my own judgment. My cruelty at that time was the sharpest knife, cutting into his already ravaged body. We were torturing each other. He, silently enduring unimaginable physical pain. I, consumed by a spiritual pain of my own making. Our home was a silent battlefield where understanding was a forgotten casualty, and the air was thick with the premonition of a coming tragedy. As I entered my 8th month, my belly was so large that moving around was a struggle. Liam seemed to have quit his job entirely, dedicating all his time to me. He prepared for the baby's arrival with a strange, frantic urgency, as if he were in a race against time. He painted the nursery a soft, calming blue, assembled the wooden crib, and meticulously arranged tiny clothes in the dresser. I'd watch him, noticing how he'd have to stop to catch his breath, sweat beading on his forehead despite the winter chill. The tender way he handled each baby item made my heart feel a little unsteady, but my pride still stopped me from saying thank you. He bought stacks of books on childcare, taking detailed notes in a small journal. He created a list of emergency contacts, top pediatricians, and even a long-term plan for our child's education. One day, he handed me a debit card. "This is everything," he said. "All my savings, my life insurance payout. I want you to have it. For the baby. In case." Anything happens. I took it. Suspicious. What's going to happen? Where are you going? He just smiled faintly. Just planning ahead. I want you and the baby to be secure. His smile was so distant, so full of a sorrowful farewell that I couldn't comprehend at the time. Every night, he would talk to the baby through my belly. Though I remained cold, he would whisper to our child, telling him to be good, to love his mother because she had been through so much. You have to grow up to be a good man and protect your family for me, he'd say. His low, warm voice in the quiet night often made tears stream down my face. I could feel his boundless love for our child, but my heart was still locked. He packed my hospital bag with a thoroughness that was unsettling diapers, formula, and the softest receiving blankets. It felt less like preparing for a new arrival and more like preparing for a permanent departure. I continued to accept his care as my due, as his penance for his past mistakes. I didn't see that every item he bought, every plan he made, was an unspoken last testament. Liam was squeezing out the last drops of his life force to ensure that when he was gone, we would be okay. His devotion in those final months had a tragic beauty that, only in retrospect, made me realize how heartless I had been. Our home was filled with the promise of new life, but it was tainted with the bitter taste of an impending end. We stood on the precipice of life and death, of love and hate, and I was still blindly searching for evidence of his betrayal to fuel my own resentment. The truth was finally revealed on a rainy afternoon. I was sorting through papers on Liam's desk, looking for an old bill, when I found a large manila envelope from the city's cancer center, hidden at the bottom of a drawer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Trembling, I opened it. The words on the pathology report struck me like a physical blow. Diagnosis: Stage 4 liver cancer, metastatic. I stood frozen, the paper shaking in my hand. My mind went blank. So the pain was real. The weight loss was real. The frantic preparations were because he knew his time was running out. Just then, the front door opened. Liam walked in, his face gray, his eyes dull with exhaustion. When he saw the medical report in my hand, he froze. The bag of groceries he was holding slipped from his grasp, oranges rolling across the floor. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. I looked at him, my eyes burning. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why did you hide this from me? Why did you let me be so horrible to you?" Liam's shoulders slumped in defeat. He couldn't pretend anymore. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if afraid to touch me. "I didn't want you to worry," he said softly. "Not while you were pregnant. I wanted my last days to be about taking care of you, not about you having to suffer because of me." As if on cue, the woman I had long suspected, his mistress, appeared at our door. She introduced herself as Dr. Evans, Liam's oncologist, and an old college friend. She had been the one helping him manage his illness in secret. She looked at me with eyes full of reproach. "He has been enduring pain that would make most men scream, just so he could be strong for you," she said. "And you treated him like an enemy." Her every word was a slap in the face, exposing my selfishness, my petty cruelty. I looked at Liam, at his emaciated body, and I was overcome with shame. He had accepted my misunderstanding, my insults, my rejection, all to shield me from the truth. A wave of belated, crushing regret washed over me, and I collapsed at his feet, sobbing. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I'm so sorry." Liam knelt down and pulled me into his arms. His thin, bony hands stroked my hair. "It's not your fault," he whispered. "As long as you and the baby are healthy, I'm happy." In that moment, all the barriers, all the hatred, dissolved. All that remained was the excruciating pain of knowing we were about to be separated forever. Our cold house was suddenly filled with love, but it was a love steeped in bitterness and sorrow. We clung to each other amidst the wreckage of the truth, as our child kicked inside me, a reminder of the life that was beginning as another was coming to an end. I finally understood. Some people love you so much they are willing to be misunderstood, to be seen as the villain, just to protect you from a pain you don't deserve to feel. After that fateful afternoon, a new kind of quiet settled over our home, not the cold silence of anger, but the hushed reverence of souls trying to piece together the fragments of what they'd broken. Liam was incredibly weak. He lay in the crib-side rocking chair, his breathing shallow. I sat beside him, holding his skeletal hand, each of my cruel words from the past months replaying in my mind like a chorus of condemnation. While he was sleeping, I found the small, green-covered journal tucked under his pillow, the one I'd seen him writing in at night. It was a diary, written to our unborn child. I opened it. The first few pages were written in his strong, steady hand, but as I read on, the script became shaky, frail, mirroring his fading strength. Each page was a message, a testament to the immeasurable love he had for the child he would never know. He wrote a letter for our son's first birthday, telling him to eat well so Mommy wouldn't worry. He wrote one for his first day of school, reminding him to study hard so he could be a source of strength for his mother. Some pages were splotched with tear stains. He apologized for not being there to see him grow up, for not being able to walk him into school or celebrate his first successes. "I'm not afraid of dying, son," he wrote. "I'm just afraid that when I'm gone, your mother will be lonely, and you won't have a strong shoulder to lean on." When I reached the pages about me, my heart shattered. "Your mother is the most wonderful woman in the world," he wrote. "She has suffered so much because of my weakness, because of the terrible misunderstanding surrounding your grandmother's death. You must love her twice as much, 3 times as much, to make up for all the nights she cried alone. I let her hate me. I let her resent me, so that she would have a reason to focus all her energy on you, to have a reason to keep living." He even told our son that if he ever faced a great challenge in life, to look in the bottom drawer of his desk, where he had left a series of letters for every major milestone. His forethought, his all-encompassing love, made me feel so small, so ashamed. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest, and sobbed hoarse, gasping sobs of regret. Instead, while I had been nursing my hatred, he had been privately battling excruciating pain and facing his own mortality, all while meticulously planning a future for us without him. Liam woke to find me with the journal. He smiled, a soft, peaceful expression on his face. He reached out a trembling hand to wipe away my tears. "Don't cry," he whispered. "It's going to be okay." I clutched his hand, vowing that I would not let him suffer alone for one more second. We read through the pages together, dreaming of the day our son would be born. The shadow of death still loomed, but our hearts had finally found the light of forgiveness. The labor pains started on a stormy night, just as Liam's health took a critical turn. The contractions came hard and fast. Liam, startled awake, seemed to forget his own agony. He struggled to his feet, his legs shaking, and helped me to the car. His face was gray, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination. He drove through the storm, his hands gripping the wheel as if it were his last lifeline. I sat beside him, torn between the pain of childbirth and the terror of watching him fade. We reached the hospital, and as he opened my door, he collapsed onto the cold, wet pavement. He fell like a great tree that had withstood a hurricane for too long. Nurses and doctors rushed out, splitting us apart, me to labor and delivery, him to the emergency room. As they wheeled me away, he reached for my hand, his lips moving, though no sound came out. I knew what he was trying to say. "You and the baby have to be safe." I was pushed down the hall, my heart torn in two. In the delivery room, every ounce of my being was focused on the pain and on him. With every push, I screamed his name. I prayed to his mother in heaven to watch over both of them. I knew he was fighting for his life in another room, fighting to hear his son's first cry. The love for them gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. Finally, a loud, healthy wail cut through the tension. They placed my son on my chest, a beautiful baby boy, with Liam's eyes and nose. Tears of joy and sorrow streamed down my face. At that exact moment, I heard an overhead announcement. "Code Blue, emergency room. Code Blue." My heart stopped. I knew it was him. As one life began, another was ending. I hugged my son close. "Call your daddy back," I whispered. "Give him the strength to fight." Outside, the storm raged on. Life and death had never felt so fragile, so present. I lay exhausted but refused to close my eyes, terrified that when I opened them, he would be gone forever. The news from the ER was dire. Liam was in a deep hepatic coma, his body ravaged by the cancer. The doctors said his chances were almost zero. Then, Dr. Evans rushed in, her eyes red. "There's been an accident," she said, her voice trembling with a strange mix of grief and hope. "A compatible donor. It's a 1 in a million chance, Sarah. A liver transplant. It's his only shot." Without hesitation, I signed the consent forms. I believed our love, his will to see our son, would pull him through. The 10-hour surgery was the longest night of my life. I sat in my hospital bed, holding our baby, my eyes fixed on the distant doors of the operating room. As the first rays of dawn broke through the window, the surgeon emerged, exhausted but smiling. "The surgery was a success," he said. "The new liver is functioning. He's stable." I collapsed back into my pillows, sobbing with relief. A miracle. Our love had defied a cruel fate. Liam was moved to the ICU. Seeing him lying there, surrounded by machines but with color returning to his face, felt like I could finally breathe again. The days that followed were a grueling journey of recovery. I focused on getting strong for our son, while Liam fought his way back from the brink. Whenever he was conscious, his eyes would search for us, and seeing us there gave him the will to live. Our son was the best medicine he could have asked for. We never spoke of the past, only of the future. The surgery hadn't just saved his body, it had saved our marriage, transplanting hope back into our lives. 1 year later, our home is once again filled with sunlight and the happy gurgles of a baby. Liam's recovery has been remarkable. He'll never be the same, but he's alive and he's here. Our son, whom we named Asher, is just learning to walk. His first wobbly words, Dada and Mama, watching them play together on the living room floor, fills me with a peace so profound it brings tears to my eyes. A peace bought with so much pain. Helen's photo on the shelf is always surrounded by fresh flowers. I talk to her often, asking for her forgiveness, promising to take care of her boys. Standing before her grave back in Iowa, Liam squeezed my hand and whispered, "She would be so happy to see us like this." Her loss is a wound that will never fully heal, but it was the tragic, necessary lesson that taught us the true meaning of forgiveness and family. We had to walk through the storm to truly appreciate the sunshine. This afternoon, as the golden light streams onto our balcony, where the freesias I planted are in full bloom, Liam sits beside me, holding Asher. He rests his head on my shoulder, and we watch the sunset together. I finally understand a simple, profound truth. Some people will love you enough to let you misunderstand them, to let you see them as the villain, if it means protecting your peace. Liam is that kind of man, and I am so incredibly lucky that I didn't lose him forever. Asher giggles as a butterfly lands on a flower. Liam smiles, the most radiant, genuinely happy smile I have ever seen. We pull our son into a shared hug, 3 hearts beating as one, warm in the embrace of a family that refused to be broken. After all the misunderstandings, the heartache, and the loss, we have found our way home. Our story is a reminder to always listen with your heart, and to never let anger blind you to the truth. The sun is setting behind the tall buildings, but in my heart, a new sun has risen, one that will warm our little family for all the days to come. I close Liam's journal, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a new chapter, a lifetime of making up for lost time, of cherishing every precious moment we have been given together.